Wizards, welcome back. We're gonna do something we haven't done in a while with some more optic reviews, and we'll be looking at some more LPVOs, so I wish them luck. I joke, I was actually surprised by how much I like this optic, and I shared that in our end of year wrap up in 2024. I just wanted you to hear what my thoughts were on this optic and where I kind of found the high points and the low points so you can make the smartest purchase possible. And that LPVO we'll be diving into today is the Primary Arms PLx-c 1-8, second focal plane in the Nova fiber wire reticle with the flat dark earth finish. Now I also have the SLX version that I'll reference as we talk about its more expensive brother, but if you have questions about this less expensive version, make sure to put them down in the comments and I'll do my best to answer, but we'll talk about this guy a lot as we go and kind of a comparison to it also. Just know the SLX version is still second focal plane, but it's 1-6, has a little worse housing, and just a tiny less fancy reticle, but most people probably won't notice the difference. And I know I'm a little bit late to the game with these. I think they're releasing some new Novas like right now here at SHOT Show. But I think my time with it and doing a lot more reviews of 5.56 rifles and 6mm arc has really helped me see where the Nova scopes fit in terms of like speed and tactical accuracy and not really on the precision side. I kind of want to explain it to you and I'll show you as we go. But first, let's take a minute. Thank today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Fatboy Tripods. In a world where you don't get to pick your terrain, the Fatboy Tripods offer you a solution for precision accuracy in any environment. With the inverted legs of the Elevate tripod, you can loosen and lift to set your height. With the Elevate head, then giving you tension adjustment with the flick of a wrist to set you up for that perfect shot. Fatboy Tripods are just mastering accuracy literally anywhere. And I often share that I use the Fatboy Tripods behind the scenes for all my camera setups like we're doing today. And I love how they pull double duty and I can use them out at the range also and just mount my rifles up to them and do some long range shooting. And as always, you can use discount code TLDco or on the Fatboy website to save a bunch on these. So big thanks to Fatboy for all the literal and figurative support and for helping to keep our voice unfiltered. Now, before we tear into this scope, we gotta take a second, the annoying, boring stuff, talk about my biases. Primary Arms did send us both the SLX and the PLx-c Nova optics to use in other rifle reviews like the PSA Jackal and the MASP Executive Call of Duty gun that I haven't even shown you yet. And Primary Arms has been one of those original supporters of the channel to give us a chance when we didn't even know what the hell we were doing. Well, I still don't think we know what we're doing, but my heart does go out to them for believing in us from the very beginning, making me really biased in a positive way. But we're also looking at LPVOs, which I've really kind of learned over time that they're jack of all trades, master of none. It's really kind of made me dislike them as a choice. So that's made me pretty biased in a negative way. Just know that I'm probably all over the place in terms of my biases, and that's pretty indicative of reality. So as I always tell you, don't take anything that I say or any other YouTuber says as gospel. We're all biased in some way, even subconsciously. So make sure to do your own research so you can be the most educated consumer possible. All right, enough of that. Let's finally get this thing on the bench, and then we can start going over everything and nerding out over the reticle. Kind of for good and kind of for bad. And no, we're not doing unboxing. We stopped doing that. Everybody besides 8-year-olds hated that. Finally, looking at our PLx-c Nova, we see it mimics the same housing design of our all-time favorite of the PLx-c Griffin, but now in a flat dark earth variant. As a side note, FDE is basically the tactical way of saying whatever shade of brown you feel like today. I think I even have some Unity FDE mounts that are not anywhere even close to each other in terms of color. But we also have a full review of this PLx-c first focal plane LPVO and the fantastic Griffin reticle. If you want to see that one also, I'll link to it somewhere up here. But we're going to see much of the same as it's the same housing, and that's really what you want, as the compact in the name gives you a much smaller size and weight to focus on what the concept of an LPVO is really designed for. Now though, starting at the rear, we have a nice diopter with some knurling around the outside that has, I'll say, a perfect level of resistance. You can feel the tiniest little bit of opposition locking into the detent, letting you know it'll stay into place. Moving forward, we have our matching knurled magnification ring that travels 180 degrees around to go from 1x all the way to 8x. I'll say that 180 degrees is about the max degree of rotation you want to have in order to be able to move through these different positions quickly. I will say though that the lack of parallax and an 8x is a little bit silly. So I'd more than likely just use the 6x position and have more like an 120 degree rotation here. Oh wait, no, it's different from the Griffin. It's second focal plane, so you can't do that. You can only use, I guess all you have is 1 to 8 at 180 degrees. Oh, I don't love that. Well, all the PLx-c's thankfully include a throw lever to make the rotation easy at least. And the whole magnification ring is just silky smooth, pretty much like it's on ball bearings. As we do with our Griffin, you can also swap out the throw lever for the flip-up style if you want that. I personally like the flip-up style, but does it make you any faster? No, not really, so don't stress out about it. Now on the side of our scope, we see our battery compartment, and here I'll show you the orientation of the 2032 battery if for some reason you forgot how it's seated. The ring around the compartment also functions as the illumination control with 10 positions of brightness and off positions between each brightness setting. As with the Griffin, I love this in terms of illumination control because it means I can just click up and down between the positions I like if I want illumination on or not, instead of having to roll all the way through the whole ring each and every time. This also becomes highly important on the Nova Reticle because that dot is super bright, yes, but it's also 2 MOA, crushing literally any accuracy at range. So thankfully you have a quick way to flip this on and off depending on your engagement distance. We'll talk about that more when I share some of our range testing for sure. But as another side note, the PLx-c versions also have auto live. So if you happen to leave that red dot on and you set it down, it'll actually turn itself off after a period of time. Then when you pick it back up, it'll turn back on. It's pretty slick, and it'll save your battery if you just leave the settings on like I do with all my scopes, and then they die. Oh, and I'm assuming some of you guys noticed the mount and probably have a lot of questions about why it's like 2 inches tall. It plays into the reticle and all that. We'll get into it, I promise. Moving to the turrets though, we have these nice knurled caps that cover the elevation and windage underneath. Here we're thankfully in mils, good grief because MOA sucks, and each click is in 0.1 mil increments or 0.35 inches at 100 yards. I do find it very interesting that every time I go to the range, there's at least one person struggling with how to zero their optic. So comment down below if you want a video on how I zero all these optics that I test. I do it pretty quickly. I think I promised I would make this video for you a long time ago. Zeroing should be 2 shots, maybe 3, or you're probably doing something wrong, or there's just an easier way to do it. Well, unless you're using a red dot, sometimes you have to chase it, and then you could just know your measurements on the paper and then it doesn't really matter. I'm getting off on too far of a tangent here. Yeah, good grief. Just let me know if you want something on that later. But the caps cover the turrets and they're super nice, but I want you to remember this, as making quick turret adjustments isn't gonna be fast, and you're far more likely to zero and put these caps on and never ever touch them again. I say that and I wanna foot stomp it. This is highly pivotal as we move forward talking about the scope and the use cases, as we're probably going to be using holdover for everything we're gonna do with this scope. The idea of taking these all the way off, like unscrewing them, making 4, 5, 6, 10 clicks of adjustment, and then putting them all the way back on, and then engaging your target, well, that's just kind of dumb. I mean, maybe you would do that with your windage where you kind of want to change it for the different environment that you're in, but you just set it once and then leave it. You're not going to adjust it for every shot. Doing that for every single elevation that you change to, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. So remember that, because it means our Nova reticle inside the scope has to do a lot of heavy lifting like we saw with the Griffin reticle. This is also a key moment to talk about. If you ever hear someone say that a reticle is too busy, but then they use holdover and they don't make any sort of turret adjustments, well, they probably eat more than their recommended amount of paint chips, which is 0. Moving to that Nova, we see a duplex reticle design with some smart additions. Along the side, we see mil markings and half mil increments out to 5 mil to help with windage and distance measurements, plus helping with that zeroing I mentioned. Along with the top and bottom, we see the same But the lower stadia act as auto ranging markers to give you the approximate shoulder distance to determine target distance and then immediately engage. The center of the reticle has a small dot, but also uses an ultra bright fiber optic to give you a red dot bright reticle that gives you a similar 2 MOA dot when utilized in a red dot style configuration. So ideally, you'd have that bright 2 MOA dot for those quick, fast engagements within your zero distance, and then you can turn it off for some added precision, or just leave it on and then use those lower stadia lines as you go out to distance to give you some precision and actually know where you're actually shooting at, have some sort of dope marker. But the magic of how the fiber wire works and how you get that super bright dot is by having the second focal plane reticle that doesn't move or change as the magnification changes. But that also means to use holdover, you need to be at 8x so the mil markers actually line up correctly. So you're making a pretty massive trade-off compared to the PLx-c Griffin right off the bat, where in the Griffin, you can use all the different magnification ranges, 4, 6, whatever, like whatever gives you the most eye relief or whatever you're trying to do, but not on the PLx-c Nova because it requires second focal plane in order to make that bright fiber wire reticle that so you can actually see it, the red dot bright, to actually work. So what that means is the cost of this red dot means you only have 2 positions of this scope, 1x and 8x. Anything in between would not give you a proper holdover and couldn't be used for engagement. And yeah, we're gonna get to the range stuff, but having no parallax adjustment and 8x magnification started to not make a whole lot of sense when we started to stretch things out. Plus, I'll be honest, the 8x was never a shining point of the PLx-c Griffin to begin with. Because of the compact nature of the scope, you just start to have a physics problem. But talking about some of this and why it does bad long range and good close range leads me into talking about more of the mounts that I'm using. So with the 8x accuracy being so-so, I leaned more into the 1x side of things, and this would allow me to clear IR illuminators and have a much more heads-up position like I would want with the red dot. That's the idea anyway. I hope you can kind of see where my head was at in using that kind of mount. We'll see if it actually works at all though, but let's do some of our tests, and the first one is a perfect one because it's where I leaned this whole setup heavily, and that's the 1x clarity. Now, I'll say this is probably going to be the strongest point for the PLx-c Nova, and I think it does this well to give you an easy to see image with good edge-to-edge clarity and almost no shadow at all around the image. We do see the slightest fisheye along the edges, but it's almost impossible to notice at speed, and I also didn't notice any loss of color in the lens either. So yeah, we do have that red dot level of image, but we've also now introduced parallax and scope shadow. So let's see how this does at 8x and see how the Eyebox changes when the magnification goes all the way out. Here at 8x, the image brightness gets hit pretty hard, and the Eyebox becomes just punishingly tight, making those quick, fast engagements far, far more challenging. Just scaling back to 6x, we have a ton more light and forgiveness in the Eyebox to make the whole setup actually usable in its designed application. I just don't love being locked in at 8x, and I really am looking heavily at the SLX Nova as the one I prefer for being a far more functional scope for a ton less money too. We'll see if I keep that opinion though as we move into Illumination. Here it's got some super high highs and a couple lows I want to mention. The bright red reticle in the second focal plane optic gave us true red dot brightness levels in our LPVO. There is no doubt you could engage targets within your zero distance and see them clearly. The knob also easily adjusts between the varied brightness from dark indoor environments all the way to full day bright situations. But an issue arises if you need to engage a target at distance if it wasn't bright out. The reticle doesn't illuminate any of the holdover stadia or ranging markers, leaving you unable to engage the target itself if it wasn't providing proper contrast against those mil markings. And I think this is kind of the theme here, where the PLx-c Nova is going to perform almost as well as a red dot and then perform a little bit better than a red dot would at range. It's really just more sliding the effectiveness to the right and not really giving you a this and that situation like I feel like we got a little bit more with the Griffin. Now, let's move into the next test, which is the turrets. And like I said before, this is one of those where you're probably going to set this once and never touch it again. Taking off the caps, though, we see the turrets themselves give a soft, audible click, and they're tactile, but you could miss it if you were doing this outside of just zeroing in a quiet environment. Not gonna believe this. I was actually looking at the box, and there is a non-cap turret you can actually use. I probably put this somewhere smart, and now I have no idea where it is, so it's lost now. I don't know. I just don't see a lot of people using that. And I say that because if you want dial level precision, you're looking for more precision than an LPVO is gonna give you anyway. But no, that's my thoughts. And hold on here. Plus, I would definitely want the turret on the windage and not on the elevation, because that would be way, way more helpful. But we gotta keep this train moving. We got one more test. Let's go check out the glass clarity. At 1x, I think the glass clarity is great to give you an image without any sort of distortion, and it looks crisp with a nice 1-to-1 recreation. But at 8x, which I'm stuck with using, it's okay, I guess. The scope just seems to be at its max for this range. Looking through brush, you see the problem that I'm bringing up. As the parallax has the trees and branches next to me in focus, but not the target behind it that I would be aiming at. And there's no way to clean that up. Again, close range targets, yeah, it'll do great. Will it do better than a red dot? That's debatable. But as you reach out to distance, the Griffin and some of the other LPVOs really take over as what they can do and are far better choice. Also, it's 8 times magnification, so 1 to 8. So that's the same as having a 2 to 18 or a 5 to 40. There's a physics problem that starts to happen when you go to that range, and it's why most scope manufacturers don't do that large of a range. I mean, my favorite scope that I think Primary Arms makes is their 2.5 to 10, and that's 4 times magnification. This one is literally trying to pull off double that. So you can see why the challenge starts to happen when you're forcing me to use such a high end of the magnification that from a physics side is going to be a problem. But let's hit the range and see how this thing actually does in some real world usage. Starting with our Jackal footage with the SLX version, I'll tell you the Nova Firewire did a great job in letting me quickly transition between targets. Not only in seeing the target, but also in tracking my red dot to control recoil in a more consistent way. I felt like the Nova shined here for sure. But when we went to do accuracy, the bright dot occluded the center position, but we were still able to shoot some really great sub-MOA groups. But I'd be lying if I wasn't just kind of aiming and praying with every shot. Next though, we loaded up the PLx-c Nova on our 18-inch 6mm arc executive. I think it did well from 100 all the way to 300 to give us fine adjustments in the stadia lines to make shots and even engage very, very small targets. I actually missed that little shard, but barely. Going out to 430 here, things got more challenging as the recoil made the Eyebox a lot harder to track impacts. As I was learning the dope of this setup, it took me far longer to see what would be obvious to a spotter or with a less punishing scope. I eventually got it and the boring accuracy of the 6mm arc took over. Working out to 600 yards, we see where a lack of parallax comes into play, putting me at the limit of my optic with the 6mm arc round being able to go double this distance easily. So is it as fast as a red dot in its 1x setting? No, it's just not, but it is super close. But can it reach out further and make more accurate engagements than a red dot and a magnifier combo? Yeah, I do. I think it really can, and the stadia lines really help me be able to do that in making consistent shots at range instead of just kind of floating a red dot in space and hoping I hit something. And I mentioned this kind of at the beginning, but in terms of rolls, the PLx-c Nova does really, really well in those quick, fast engagements. And it also gives you some added precision, if not really insane. It does give you some extra precision though, in those longer range engagements, capping out at about 500 or 600 yards. Again, I said this earlier, it's like taking that slider of effectiveness of the red dot and just shifting it a little bit to the right, but you're not gaining something over the other. They're just different applications where one does a little better with mid-range and one does a little bit better with close range. But let's take a look at this, and here are kind of my final thoughts and rankings. I was just thinking, I don't think we've ever done LPVO rankings. Well, we will now. I'll say the PLx-c Nova does a great job in giving you an LPVO with the bright fiber Nova reticle to make fast engagements quick and easy, and then also giving you an edge over red dot setups at distance. But the second focal plane design required for the reticle locks you in at 8x, which isn't the strongest point of this optic and doesn't synergize with the cap turrets and lack of parallax, meaning you're likely going to max out at 500 to 600 yards in terms of viewing capability and those mill marking holdovers, which effectively cut the legs of our 6mm arc setup in half. Ranking some of the primary arms LPVOs, the first focal plane PLx-c Griffin is still my number one, followed by the GLX 1-6 Griffin, and interestingly, I found the price to performance value of the SLX Nova to be a bit higher than the PLx-c Nova in terms of where I would place these in terms of recommendations. If I could talk to the PLx-c Nova, I would probably tell it to just stay in the lane that it does well at and focus more on those quick, fast engagements, but stay out of the 1 to 8 space that the Griffin and some of the other primary arms offerings do like 1,000 times better. Now, I do have my eyes on one of the other primary arm scope that they just released on the Discovery 2025. That's their 2.5 to 20. That's a huge range, but it could actually be exactly what we need to stretch out and use the full range of the 6mm arc. So stay tuned as we review this entire MASP Executive 6mm arc platform, along with searching for that perfect 0 to 1,000 optic setup. I'll tell you, I've already tried a few optic setups to include this one, and I'll also say that the Voodoo, this one, it fell short pretty hard. So I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm leaning pretty heavily into that Primary Arms 2.5 to 20. We'll see though, but I hope this video on the Primary Arms PLx-c Nova was useful in your purchasing decisions. I want to say thanks to all of our Patreon members and our YouTube supporters. You guys make it possible we can see these optics, test them out, and come back and tell you which ones are worth your money and what application they do best at. And I want to say thanks to everyone that likes, comments, and subscribes. Comment down below what your thoughts are on the PLx-c Nova. I want to hear about it and where you would rank these optics. I'd be very interested to hear that. All right, everyone, Walsh out. So interestingly, I actually wrote my whole review for this and I was like, hey, let me hear some other people's thoughts before I go record everything, make sure I didn't miss something. And it was funny because I watched the C-Does video and, just kind of going over some of his main points. I'm like, yeah, I agree. Some things I was like, I don't care about. But then he gets to the end where he talks about how he talked to the owner of Primary Arms and there was no plan to make this version in a 1-6. And I'm going to echo him here at the end. I hope somebody from Primary Arms watches this. C-Does, you are absolutely correct. This in a 1-6 there would be very small reasons to buy anything else in terms of an LPVO. Maybe that 1 to 8 Griffin, but even then, I don't think that would be the case. So I'm with you, C-Does. That's a very weird that they didn't include this. But yeah, I'm on my quest to find the best 0 to 1,000 yard optic, like that optic combo that can use 6mm arc, because this thing's crazy. If you haven't tried this thing, it is boringly accurate. You just hit the same little tiny dot at 600 yards, and I would just shoot it like 3 times and I just got up and I was like, I'm not, like, this is boring. I'm gonna go do something else. I'm gonna play games or something. So I'm looking at what mid-range optic, maybe like a 3 to 18 with a top dot or whatever, what combination of optics actually works all the way from a CQB range to 1,000 yards or 1,200. You could probably go that far with a 18-inch. So we'll see. I also got some cool suppressors and stuff we're gonna show on this. So yeah, hold tight for this review. It's gonna be awesome. I don't have anything else. Yes, am I hiding cool things back here? Yeah, I am. All right, you guys gotta go. Bye.